I'm recycling a little bit of footage from yesterday from the supporter video. Some spectacular, very low stratus down at about 100 feet above the ground. Well, nothing like that today. Skies are clear, and let's take a look at the surface map. Our analysis for this Tuesday afternoon shows a frontal system moving out of the southern Rockies. Low pressure centered around Lyman, Colorado, with a cold front extending south to Albuquerque and down to Phoenix. You can see in the lower Colorado River region right here, the winds have not turned around to the north. Typically, when they've had frontal passage, you'll see winds pretty much straight north at about 15 to 25 knots. The high pressure located up there in Nevada, 1026 millibar high. And looking out in the eastern U.S., looks like we've got an old stagnant high pressure system, old stagnant air mass. Once again, north winds and temperatures in the 30s. And then taking a look up in Canada, let's see what's going on up there. Yeah, they're definitely in the icebox. Pelly Bay, known by its Inuit name, Kugarak, minus 51, and that's pretty close to the all-time record of minus 60. Oh, I got that wrong. That's not Kugarak, that's Kugaruk. I'm just not up on these Inuit names. But there's the climatology table. Record low actually minus 61, so we're coming in within about 10 degrees of that. Typically they bottom out around minus 35. And I think for overnight lows in January, that's got to be one of the coldest places in Canada. Of course, not to be outdone by Yakutsk. We talked about Yakutsk back in December, and you can see that typically they get down to minus 42. And they've seen it as low as minus 81. Anything like that today? Yeah, pretty close. We got minus 57. That's going to be, I think, just north of Yakutsk. I know that town is somewhere right in there. And let's see, yeah, minus 54. So it's fairly cold, but we're not close to any records. One interesting thing that you see here, look at that. Cloud symbols. Russia still reports cloud types. That's one thing we've lost here in the U.S. because of the automation of all the systems. So in some ways, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So many of our longtime viewers are aware that I love these thickness and pressure charts because this gives me a glance at the air masses, how everything's configured structurally, and from there, I've got a good springboard for looking at the upper air charts and some of the other fields. Now, looking at the thickness, which is these red and blue lines, where we have this troughing where it bends south, that's going to be cold air. So that's a cold air mass. Similar situation out in the northern Rockies, the northern high plains, and another area of troughing off the west coast right there. And likewise, we have thermal ridging where these lines bend north. So we know that there's warm air advection setting up off the northwest coast. Very tiny bit of warm air advection right there south of Newfoundland, and looks like there's warm air advection setting up in the Great Plains around Texas and Kansas. And by finding the gradients where the thickness is very close together, that indicates the existence of strong thermal gradients. And typically we find fronts just south of those zones. So for example, out in the Pacific, that's going to be a cold front right there. That's probably going to bring more high surf to California and Oregon, more of those so-called sneaker waves. There's another cold front there off the east coast. An occlusion coming back into the Newfoundland area. And here's another cold front. That's the one we were looking at out in the southern Rockies. And the hemispheric upper air chart shows a highly zonal pattern out in the Pacific. This is that right there, winds up to 170 knots in that, and that's going to continue to funnel the storms into the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia. Doesn't look like a whole lot of blocking going on. The patterns are kind of split up here, though, in Europe. It looks like the main polar front jet is kind of diving south around most of that. And we see the main polar vortex centered up there in the Canadian high Arctic and a couple of other vortices out over into Siberia. The flow across the U.S., highly progressive. The forecast animation shows that progressive pattern, but it looks like towards the 9th or 10th, there's some indication of some ridging building up along the west coast, and that could bring some cold air down into the eastern U.S., and that would be about 1 to 2 weeks down the road. For the short-term forecast in the northwest U.S., looks like a pretty quiet day. We've got this disturbance moving through Wyoming and Rapid City. That does not really look to me like a front. You can see that the air mass on one side, mid-40s up to 50, and on the other side, looks like maybe mid-40s on average. So this looks like maybe a little upper air disturbance, maybe some mid-level, maybe a mid-level front, something like that. But it is moving south, and it's got snow showers back behind it. High pressure in the Great Basin area, and then out in the coastal regions, we have the next warm front heading northeastward, and that's going to impact the weather tonight. You can see very strong gradient offshore, and that's the next frontal system right there. Here it comes by midnight. Conditions deteriorating off the coast of Eureka, Arcata, California. I think the fronts are going to be looking something like that right there. And then tomorrow it moves inland. And there's how things look around midday. So that's going to be an open wave frontal system. Not quite as strong as what we had a couple days ago, but it will be moving through that area. And you can see snow showers probably down to about the 5,000 foot level. Short-term conditions for the southwestern U.S. showing that cold front moving through northern New Mexico, and there's a few wind advisories back in that area. The tail end of the front, like we said, still approaching Phoenix. However, it looks like it's pushed into the Mojave region, and you can see back in the San Joaquin Valley, winds are out of the northwest, and we've got fog in those valleys. That's very common this time of year with the moist agricultural areas, the sheltering provided by the mountains around that valley. And there we can see some of that fog there. Quite a bit of it near Bakersfield with that northwesterly flow. It pushes some of that right up to the foothills, and some of it holding on around the Stockton, Sacramento area. And we can see that that front in New Mexico is a dry front that has crossed the Rockies, and it has not involved very much moisture. However, we do see in the upper levels there is some jet stream dynamics associated with that southern polar front jet. And up around the Raton, Trinidad area, you can see a little bit of mountain wave activity. And with that, a little bit of bumpy weather, PIREPs indicating moderate turbulence anywhere from Denver down to Albuquerque. Short-term conditions for the southeastern U.S. shows this high-pressure area and ridge right along the Mississippi River region. High pressure centered in Arkansas, and that puts Texas under the return flow with this system approaching from the Rockies, and that also puts the Georgia, Carolinas under northeasterly flow, still within that cold air advection zone. Very likely, due to the cool weather out there in the Carolinas, we probably will set up some cold air damming as this system approaches from the west. And we're talking about cold air kind of lurking in this area right here and being blocked by the Appalachians. And as the high pressure moves off to the east, we're going to see the pressure gradients increase a bit there in Texas and bring up some of the moisture. Now you notice I put that little dry line down there. That's not something a lot of forecasters would do, but I do think that there is some dry air off to the west and some moist air off to the east, and I kind of wanted to delineate that a little bit. And likely we may see that moisture gradient start to firm up a little bit in West Texas. Dew points in the Rio Grande Valley in the mid-60s. So there is moisture lurking to the south. Yep, precipitable water close to an inch, and you can see that advecting up into Texas and interacting with that system coming out of the Rockies. And with over an inch precipitable water, that's going to mean showers and possibly a few thunderstorms developing overnight and moving eastward into the southeastern U.S. going into Thursday and Friday. And last but not least, the northeastern U.S. Who would be least? Somebody's got to be least. I don't know. Yeah, there's our system out there in Kansas. That's going to be mostly heading into the southeastern U.S. You can see that much of the region dominated by this high-pressure area out in Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas, and that's driving this west-northwest flow into much of the northeastern states. Now, this is a stagnant air mass. In other words, it's kind of been in place for a couple of days. This is residual polar air. A lot of low cloud indicating that there has not been much mixing. And why don't we just dig in there and take a look at a sounding for the western Pennsylvania area. And you can see that there's a pretty strong inversion there up at about 7,000 or 8,000 feet and quite a bit of moisture trapped beneath it. And all that spells broke into overcast clouds. So this delineates the cold air pretty much sitting over the entire northeast U.S. And with that weather system moving south of the region, we're just going to see continued northerly flow. So we'll have that cold air digging underneath that inversion, pop up a sounding there for, I guess it's going to be sometime Thursday, and you can see it's much the same. And gradually, as the weather system moves out into the Atlantic, well, continue northerly flow, so just more of the same. Grab Pittsburgh there again for Saturday, and yeah, it looks like we're thinning out some of the moisture, so we're going to probably see some of the conditions starting to improve. Maybe a little bit of warmer weather soon. So looking at our national forecast, and we're going to use the European model for this. I like the idea of poking around with the GFS and then putting it together with a different model, the European model. The European has actually done a pretty good job this winter. So what do we see here? We see showers developing in East Texas due to that moisture return from the Gulf. That's going to be overnight towards dawn, and thunderstorms, so I may not be taking much aerial footage tomorrow. That's going to move eastward as a squall line into Mississippi overnight. You can see some wintry weather developing there in Missouri, back there in the deformation zone, and things continue moving eastward into Georgia and the Carolinas for Friday. Looks like some snow in Kentucky, mixed precip in Tennessee and the Appalachians, snow where the freezing level is low enough. Then we get the ridging building in for Friday and Saturday. Looks kind of like a quiet weekend. Yep, big old 1032 millibar high, but you can see that things are deteriorating in West Texas. Let me back that up just a little bit. Looking at Saturday night, that's going to be a Pacific system, probably about right there. If we looked at the upper level chart, in fact, why don't we do that, since that's what we do here. So you can see that we're in this progressive flow. There's Thursday, and then Friday, and here's what I want you to watch out there on the West Coast. Watch how this weather system digs into the southern Rockies. There it comes. Jet streak running through here. Let me change the color a little bit. And that's going to put this area under the divergent left front quadrant for Saturday night. And that's what's going to have an impact on that area. So that's the upper level conditions driving what's happening in the lower levels, and of course some cold air also entering the mix. So snow once again for West Texas, that area around Fort Stockton getting hit once again, and this goes right into the Gulf. And of course that doesn't mean things are over. A lot of times these systems will move up the East Coast, and then we'll be looking at nor'easter conditions. Does that happen this time? Yep, certainly possible. This one is tracking up the coast. European model has it in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York area for Tuesday night, and then a full-fledged system moving up into New England for Wednesday. So we'll return to that later this week and early next week and see what's going to happen. And that's all I've got for this edition of Forecast Lab. We have been seeing an influx of new viewers, and I want to encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe, as they say. And that will ensure that I keep investing time and effort into this channel and giving you a little bit of education and information about meteorological patterns. So until tomorrow, take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.